Okay, so hopefully you coded along with the attendance, because that's where we're going to start from as far as our first code along example. So if you didn't do it, make sure you have it, and you'll see why in a minute. So the first thing, the first code along, is I want you to, and I'll help you do the setup in a minute, but read through this link I've provided for some beginning information. These are parts of the guide of MDN, and it's a pretty long post here, but the more you look at code, the more it starts to make sense, right? And this is a good basic introduction to basically it's reusable blocks of code. And we've already seen that in the work that we've done. So what we're going to do today is we're going to take the work we've already done, we're going to make it a little more optimized, and we're going to learn about return values. So that's what we're going to do. And then in the process, we're going to talk about scope, because understanding scope is really, really important. Okay, so here's our code from the code along the discussion for week 3, but really the attendance for week 4. So make sure you have something close to this, and you'll see why. So now what I'm going to do is we're going to use this as the starting code for our first code along for week 4. So because I have my public open and I want to grab this code, there's a couple of ways I could do it, but probably pretty easily I would do, or probably the most straightforward thing I would do here is I'd go into the base folder, because then that would give me access to both my public and my private. Now, for those of you who are wondering why all these other ones are here, is as you run into things and that you're asking me questions, I will clone. Eventually, I will end up cloning everyone's public and private repos, because it's part of the way I start grading, is to make sure you have working code. So know that this will grow, and that's part of why I also open just the repo I need. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go into my private. My private repo. I'm going to create a new folder. Notice how I highlighted that my private. I'm going to do week 4 lowercase. I'm going to come down here. I'm going to select one, hit shift, do the other one, hit copy, come back to 4, and I'm going to hit paste. And what that does is it brings it over for me. So now I have both of them. And now what I would do is open the private. So now that's the only thing I'm looking at, and there's nothing else in there. It just makes my life a little easier. I would open week 4. I think you can just drag these over is the other way you can do it. And that's kind of nice, just drag them. I know I did it pretty quickly, but I can just drag those over to open them up. It opens them in different tabs. Like I've shown before, you can have, if you do it this way, right? So here I would change this to 4, and I'm just going to do carbon footprint, get rid of that, and then we're good to go. So here, go ahead and do, now that you have that setup done, right? So do a commit here. Remember, git add star, git commit -m, right? Setup done. Cool. And now remember, you don't have to do git push yet. You'll do that at the end. You can if you want, if you feel like you just want to have it out there, but it's not until really ready to submit you want it all out there, so it's up to you. Okay, so let's take a look at this. I think I'd actually like my index file over there, and mostly because we're not going to do too much with it yet. We'll do something in a bit. So let's remind ourselves where we're at. We have 2 function calls, right? The one I did in attendance, or you've already written. I have a global variable. Now, global means basically it's not in a block, okay? Now, we've seen already in this course that functions have an opening parenthesis and a closing parenthesis. That's a block. We've seen that on a conditional statement, there is another block, okay? So when you're writing code inside of a block, right, that's what we call block scope. Okay, so what we could do, let's just do this, is inside of here we'd say console.log, and we'd say block, inside block scope. Okay, and we could do the same thing. I've got to fix my semicolons. And I said inside function here, but I'm going to paste over and I'm going to say inside. And now we could be even more specific and say which function, which would be kind of nice as well. But I want you to get the idea is that we are inside of this function. This function has an open and closed parentheses. Therefore, anytime you see, which by the way, FYI, you could just do block scope out here. It's still the same idea of a block scope, but it's not as common to see it. And if I did it there, right, I would be creating a block scope out on the global. Again, not really the way you do it, but it creates the same concept, right? So out here, I'm going to paste in, I'm going to say inside, or I could just say global scope, right? Okay, so what this means by global scope is anywhere, and that's why, and really I should probably do this, is move that up there. Why? Why would I do that? Because in this code, I'm getting ready to output something that says, hey, I'm in global scope. Okay. Now what does global scope mean? That means anything I declare out here, not inside of a block, is available anywhere in my code. And that's an important concept to understand based on what we're about to do. Because we're going to end up changing these functions to use more block scope because, and this is what I want in your notes, you want to minimize, okay? Now notes just means, right, use some comments, right? Right, I'm going to give you the verbiage, you write it. You want to minimize the amount of things we declare as far as variables on the global scope. And there's a couple ways we could do it, and I'm going to show you one way today. Okay? All right, so I'm going to go ahead, if you don't already, have your, and I'm going to go into week 4. Good, I'm going to go to inspect. And so I should see the output, right? Global scope. Did I already have? Right. Yeah, that's a really good point. Why would global scope, this is so good, I didn't even really plan this. Why would, and answer that in your note, right? So now you have first comment, first note, you know what it is. Now second note, now you don't put second note, answer the question. What's your guess? Why did global scope show up first when it was not until here? Okay? And the answer is when the file loads. Okay? It just sets up. So JavaScript sets up these functions in memory, but it doesn't run them until here. It doesn't call them. So before this point in the file, right, these functions are just setting in memory waiting for you to call them. And that's why global scope showed up first, because it was the first thing it actually executed, because it was setting out on global scope. It was the first thing it actually did. Now, see it live. Go here, right? Hit refresh. Now, I'm going to show you this another way. Come up here. Right? If I hit break, and it'll go inside, so it's not the best. I could actually do it above there. Okay? Because if I do it here, it says, no, you want to go inside of here. Because now it's just setting this up. Oh, actually, it's calling it from within side of it. Yeah. That's a good point. That's a really good point. In DevTools, that actually has changed a little bit. Okay? So here's one way I could get around that. Now you might wonder why. I'm going to say .log. I'm going to say top of file. Okay. Cool. I'm going to let this run. Refresh it. So now, because when I was trying to set a breakpoint, it was like, no, you want to be inside the function. And I'm like, no, really, I wanted to set it here when you're setting it up in memory. Now, don't get too bogged down into that. But I can now set the breakpoint here. I can, right? Let it run, top of file, but now let's actually watch it run. Okay, so the first thing JavaScript does is it goes through it, and this is on the global scope, right? It's going to say, hey, I'm going to set up. It doesn't even show you, but it does set up both these functions here, okay? And now it jumps to 37 because all it's done is set up the two functions, hit step. Now it's executed that. It set up the global variable. And now we're actually calling the function. Okay? So, did that help? Understand it a little bit, right? So inside of here, we're inside block scope, right? So the first thing that'll happen here is it'll say inside block scope, and now we're going to run our logic, our conditional logic, which we know by now. We could run it. We know what's going to happen, right? Once it hits that 5, boom, it does a console log, and by the way, at this point, it comes back here. It returns its control back to here, and now it's going to run determine house size. And if I didn't want to watch this run, I could just say finish, and it would just finish it up. Okay, or I could also say jump over it. All right, so now we've learned a little about scope, and the reason we use scope is so that we can have things confined within block scope whenever possible, so it doesn't bleed into our logic of other, because it's very easy once you get larger code bases, meaning more lines of code, to actually accidentally write over something. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to rewrite these two functions to utilize and get rid of the carbon footprint that's defined here. And I'll show you, and we're going to do that in way of a return value. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to comment this out. Okay, I'm going to go down here. I'm going to do function. I'm going to say start. So I'm declaring a new function called start. And now what I can do is I can just take these two lines. Now I'm not done with them because I'm actually going to do something to them. And just doing this, okay. Matter of fact, I almost want to do a code challenge here, but to yourself, just doing this, what's going to happen to my output? What's your guess? If you're not sure, come over here, let this run. I'm actually going to take off my breakpoint and just let it run, right? So we got top of file, global scope, but we don't have anything from inside because what happened was we didn't call start. Okay, so we actually have to invoke start here. I've noticed VS Code is starting to do that, where it puts a space. You don't have to have a space there. I don't know why. I have to look at why it's doing that. So now, okay, so what will come first? The global scope message or the start? So it goes in sequence, okay? Aha, but actually I have an error. And now you might wonder, why do I have an error on line 26? Because when it tried to run it, carbon, and this is really kind of the point of what the exercise is about, and let's actually set a breakpoint here. Because this, when it's squiggly like this, means it's a hard error that the program stops. It does not execute. It's what we call a hard error. And it's like carbon footprint is not defined. And it's not defined, right, because I commented it out. Okay. And so if I set that breakpoint, I refresh, I step in, right, I pass in number, right, because it jumps over line 18. It doesn't evaluate this. It's not until the condition is true that it evaluates it, and at that point it errors out. That's where you get the hard error. Okay? So that's A, to understand that part. But now let's talk about how to fix it. Okay? So what we're going to do here is in this, we're going to leave that in there. We're going to set up a variable. We're going to say let household household, let's call it PTS points. Call it PTS. PTS, I don't know. Either way, almost want to call it house, but we are using, anyway, household. Okay. All right, I'll use the longer one. I don't really want to. I could do, but anyway, we're not going to get hung up there. First thing we'd do inside of here, we'd set this as equal to 0. Because what we're going to end up doing is changing this logic instead of updating that global variable each time. What we're going to do is just say if household equal, if number in household is 1, then we know that your points for just this item, this household points, is going to be 14. So all we'd have to do here is say household and replace that. Now, I'm going to paste it. I should just write it the first time to show you. Household. And actually notice how it's trying to help me, which is awesome. And now I'm going to say equals because I'm setting the value here of household to 14. Okay? So I first, when I come into the function, I set it as 0. And now, if in this condition it's going to be equal to 14. So now I'm going to grab this. I'm going to copy it. I'm going to paste it here. And actually, there's a way you can do it all at once, but I'm going to do each step. Here. 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 And here. So this, to me, looks a lot cleaner than what we had before. Okay, you could also use switch statements, which is fun to do as well. But now, right, now I'm still going to get an error because of this. Because right now it's still trying to output that. But that's okay, we can fix that in a minute. So I've gone from, and you can see the old example here, to the new way of doing it that I'm showing you here, which is to determine or declare a variable inside the function. But there's something else we have to do, because now that we know what that value is, okay, we have to do a return household points. Okay. Now, there's a couple of things here we have to think about. Because if I return that value, right, I have to then, inside of this function, set a variable that will now become whatever that return value is. So first let's see just this in code, okay, with that, before we do that. Oh yeah, let's fix that error. Okay, and by the way, if you're not using DevTools, you really need to be, because it shows you here exactly where that error is. I was showing you before. Okay, so I would change this to based on the number of members in the house. The points would be, so what would I put here? Right? Household points. Because this number then, this function only calculates the points for the household. And I'll show you in a minute again. We'll get there. Okay? Okay, so let's go watch it run now that I fixed the error. Uh-oh, where else did it have it? Oh yeah, because it's trying to call the second function. And the second function is also going to need it. So what I'll do for a minute is I'll comment that one out. Okay, that way at least I can get running code. Alright, we're at 20 minutes. So I think what I'm going to have you do here, right, so let's finish up by me showing you, walking through this code, and then we'll pick it up on the next one. So I'm going to set a breakpoint here on line 43, right? I'm setting here, I have top of file and global scope, which by the way, top of file is also global scope. I'm going to run here, calculate household. Right now it's 0 because I set it inside of the function. Once I get here, I know that is going to be now, right now, household is equal to 6. Right? So now I know I've calculated, I've determined, I haven't calculated, I've determined what household is, and I've done a console log, and I've said return it. But where is it returning to? And this is where DevTools shows you where it returns. But check this out. Once it comes back to here, the problem is, yes, we returned it, but we didn't declare a variable inside of this function to then store it once it's returned. So at this point, household points is no longer available to us. Like if I was to just, even if I came over to scope, it's gone. Okay? So what I need to do here is say const household, and I'm going to abbreviate it here. I'm going to say house. Now I could call it the same thing here. It doesn't really matter. But to distinguish it, I am going to call it, abbreviate it this way. Okay, oh sorry. PTS. Okay, so here's what I did. I declared a variable inside of start. Okay, I called the function, passed it a parameter. Okay, argument became a parameter. And then when it hit the return, now I have it. And the way you can see it is there's a couple of ways. Console.log. Household PTS. Now let's actually just let it run. Instead of doing the breakpoint, just let it run. Good. Right? So when you, and this hopefully helps that be a little more clear. Okay? About why returning the value from a function is what you want to do, so you can use that value later. But when you do write the return, okay, remember at that point it returns control back to what called it. And that's why I do recommend you walking through DevTools a couple of times to see this in action to help you understand what it's doing. Okay. All right, so for this first one, what you're going to do is, actually I'm going to change this. This is going to be, because our next one will be a coding challenge. So what we'll do here is we'll say functions with return values. Okay, so commit that, and then the next one I'll have you do a coding challenge. Actually, go ahead and do a commit here.